Still have it in my breast pocket. Right side, behind the worn edge of the snap flap. Put it there the morning after the inquiry closed, and I have not moved it since. It is translucent, tapered to a near-invisible point at one end, and blunt-shelled at the other, where it broke free of the quick. About the length of my thumb from knuckle to tip. If you held it up to daylight, and I have many times, in the weeks since, it goes amber at the thick end and nearly clear at the tip, like a thin slice of old resin. The inside is hollow. You can feel where the claw once sat inside it, the faint ghost of a groove worn into the inner surface by something that grew and kept growing until the sheath simply fell away. I logged it as debris on the 14th day of the survey Camp Ardavan rotation. My exact entry reads, anomalous material fragment, non-metallic, origin unclear, catalogued and retained for biological assessment upon return to station. Gave it a tag number. I placed it in a sample pouch. I moved on to the next item in the inventory row. It was a cracked transit crate seam weld. The thing I had been inspecting when I found the sheath lodged in the weld joint, so cleanly nested that I almost missed it on the second pass. I had never seen a Velcar Claw-Sheath before. None of us had. The contact records for that survey corridor described the Velcar as a pack-hunting species observed only at distance, territorial around the lower ridge system, not documented above the tree line. The camp sat at mid-elevation. The official assessment was that the ridge boundary was a natural deterrent. Nobody in the briefing had mentioned shedding cycles, because nobody had been close enough to a living Velcar to know one existed. I know now that they shed roughly every 40 days during a growth phase. I know it because the xenobiological summary was filed 11 days after the inquiry, and I read every page of it twice, and then I read it a third time, sitting on the floor of my bunk at the resupply depot with the Claw-Sheath in my open palm. The Velcar are not large when they are born. They are the size of a dog at first contact. They reach the size of the largest land predators in our records by the time they hit their third growth phase, and they do it fast. Fast enough that a pack that slipped through the perimeter sensors as something small and warm-blooded would not resemble what slipped through by the time anyone thought to look again. The sensors were calibrated for the contact record sizes. Nobody recalibrated. I think about the seam weld a great deal. The transit crate had been in the supply staging area for 11 days before I opened it. The Claw-Sheath was inside the weld joint, which means whatever shed it had been inside the crate, or resting against it in an enclosed space, sometime in the first 3 days of our rotation. The crate came in on the supply run. The supply staging area was inside the inner perimeter wire. I think about the ration pouch tiers too. We logged 9 of them across the first 2 weeks as equipment wear. The seal material on that production batch was known to be slightly undersized, and the field supervisor had already flagged the manufacturer in writing. I think now about the specific shape of those tiers. I did not look at them closely at the time. I had no reason to. Tiers were consistent with the reported seal defect. They were also consistent with something pressing a curved point through soft packaging. Material in the dark, testing the contents, withdrawing. I think about the dogs as well. The 2 camp dogs, working animals, trained to alert on unfamiliar scent, went quiet on day 12, not aggressive, not distressed. Quiet in a way that the site medic noted as unusual in her personal log, which I read during the inquiry. She thought they might be adjusting to the local plant matter smell from the ridge drainage, which was strong that week after rain. They were not barking, because there was nothing unfamiliar left to bark at. Shared the camp with us had been there long enough that its smell had become part of the air. I think about the warmth in the wall panel of Survey Shelter 3, which the site engineer noted on day 9, and attributed to a ground current fluctuation in the foundation anchors. He was methodical. He ran 3 diagnostic cycles over 2 days and found no fault in the anchor array. He wrote it up as an intermittent environmental reading and closed the ticket. I think he was right that there was no fault in the anchors. I was off post on day 17, resupply run. The depot is 4 hours out by crawler, and the turnaround takes the better part of a day because the manifest verification for a survey class camp runs long when the site quartermaster, me, insists on signing every line herself rather than delegating to the runner. I Insist on that because I learned it from an armorer, 20 years older than me, who told me once that equipment you don't personally verify is equipment that will fail you in the specific moment you need it most. I think about her too. I was 3 hours into the return leg when the emergency beacon fired. I know the exact time because I logged it. 14:22 local, broad afternoon, full visibility, not a cloud in the sky over the ridge. I pushed the crawler to its rated maximum, and then slightly beyond it for the last 40 minutes, and I arrived to find that the camp no longer existed in any meaningful sense. I will not describe what I found. The inquiry record covers it in the language that inquiry records use, which is precise and adequate, and strips most of the weight out of the thing. I will say only that the Velcar pack had been inside the perimeter for what the xenobiological summary later estimated as 2 to 3 weeks, using the internal structures as cover, and range during the hours when the survey teams were working the eastern transects. They were not hiding, exactly. They were acclimating, growing into the space, learning the rhythms of it the way a thing learns the rhythms of territory it intends to take. The Claw-Sheath I had found on day 14 was from one of the younger animals in the pack. The summary noted that juvenile shedding produces smaller, more translucent sheaths than adult growth phase shedding, which runs to a darker amber and a coarser surface texture. The one in my pocket is from a juvenile. The one I found lodged in the seam weld of a transit crate inside my supply staging area and logged as debris and moved on from was left by something young and growing that I had never been told to look for. There was an inquiry question about whether earlier identification would have changed the outcome. I answered it honestly. I said I did not know. The presiding officer noted that no existing field protocol covered Velcar Claw-Sheath identification, that no biological assessment sheet had ever been issued to survey-grade armament staff for this species, and that my log entry was compliant with current standing orders. She was correct on all 3 points. The entry was compliant. It was also the only early evidence that the perimeter had already been breached, and I missed what it was. And I have thought about little else since. The xenobiological summary says, the Velcar shed sheaths in places they feel safe. Territorial marking. Not a warning to other species, not a claim. Just a byproduct of growth in a space where they have stopped being alert. The summary author notes this with what I read as a certain clinical neutrality. I do not feel neutral about it. I keep the sheath in my breast pocket because I need to remember what a thing looks like when it arrives 3 days early, and you do not know its name. I need to remember the weight of it, which is almost nothing. Less than a folded piece of paper, less than a coin. I need to remember that I held it up to the light, turned it over twice, gave it a tag number, and put it away. Shh. I need to remember all of that because I am still an armorer, and I am still the person who signs every line of the manifest herself. And, somewhere in the next survey corridor, there is something growing in a space it has decided is safe, and it is leaving evidence, and the evidence has a shape I have not learned yet. I am trying to learn faster than I did before. The sheath sits against my ribs when I breathe. Amber at the thick end, clear at the tip, hollow inside. The length of my thumb, 3 days early, and not enough.